Throughout recorded history, mankind has dreamt of building the perfect society, an empire that might somehow satisfy the needs of every man. An ancient legend casts the shadows of one such society that is said to have existed long ago. 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato set down a dialogue called the Critias. He recounted the story of an ancient Greek poet and statesman named Solon. Solon had journeyed to Egypt in search of wisdom to help the government of his beloved Greece. The Greeks had been beset with factions and troubles, so Solon took counsel from the priests of the city of Sais. An old priest told him, "O Solon, Solon, you Greeks are never anything but children. There is no old opinion handed down among you, nor any science that is white with age." The old priest then proceeded to tell him the story of the lost city of Atlantis. In the centuries that would follow, scholars and researchers have debated whether Plato's Atlantis was intended to be an account of real history or simply an allegorical myth. Some even suggest that Atlantis was really the antediluvian world, the wicked society destroyed by the wrath of God in the great flood of Noah. In the 20th century, Plato's account was further supported by Masonic philosopher Manly P. Hall. Hall claimed that Atlantis had once been a vast and mighty empire that extended to the whole world, a philosophic commonwealth of nations that one day was destined to be rebuilt. But who would rebuild it? And exactly who was Manly P. Hall?
Manly P. Hall was probably the most highly esteemed occultist and Freemason of the 20th century.
He understood the secrets of the ages long before he ever joined the Masons.
Was really the foremost authority on the occultist side of Freemasonry, the deep, dark side of Freemasonry, the one that most Masons never ascend to.
I can't really think of anybody close to him.
Manly P. Hall was one of the leading people within this whole other world that we talk about.
Hall authored over 200 books and is said to have given some 8,000 lectures on ancient philosophy. He is perhaps most remembered for his contribution to the mysterious Brotherhood of Masonry. Upon his death in 1990, the Scottish Rite Journal, a Masonic publication, noted that he was often called, quote, Masonry's greatest philosopher. Among his teachings was that contained in Masonry and all the secret orders was the ancient wisdom of lost Atlantis. Hall wrote that for more than 3,000 years, secret societies had been laboring to create a background of knowledge necessary to the establishment of an enlightened democracy among the nations of the world. According to Hall, these societies could be traced back to ancient Egypt and had for centuries known of a secret place hidden from the eyes of common men, a place that would one day be revealed. In the 17th century, as settlers were colonizing the New World, Sir Francis Bacon, the leader of secret societies in England, set down his classic work, The New Atlantis. While archaeologists and treasure hunters have searched the globe looking for the lost continent, 400 years ago, Bacon, like many of his contemporaries, believed that Atlantis was America itself.
Well, Bacon, to me, was really fundamental in the American colonizational scheme and its connection to the new Atlantis concept. He was trying to lay a foundation for what could be accomplished in the New World.
While the Atlantis of Plato was a mighty empire known for the philosophy of its kings, Bacon would write of a nation governed by scientific achievement, filled with marvels and wonders never before seen.
Bacon was talking about this new nation, talking about submarines, talking about unimaginable weapons of war, talking about flying machines and tall buildings. How did he come into possession of this knowledge?
Did Francis Bacon outline the course of the New World before its time? And if so, by what power was he inspired to do so? While there are no states or cities that bear his name, his mysterious influence has compelled some to call him the real and true founder of America.
His founding of America was really through other people who were following his work, following the program he'd laid out.
Bacon was the head of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism.
He had a huge influence through being the chief of the Rosicrucian fraternity at the time. He had a huge influence on the birth of modern Freemasonry. And many of those Rosicrucians actually went into Freemasonry at that time to lift it up to its new level. And Freemasonry has a major influence on the founding of America.
While many of the early settlers came to work the land for the cause of religious freedom, there were with them secret societies who came to the New World with another agenda.
Secret societies came to America shortly after the Pilgrims arrived, and they were sent by a man named Sir Francis Bacon.
You get this very strange mixture of people, many of whom understood even then the advantage, spiritually and otherwise, to having secret orders.
Unless you understand the influence of the occult societies on the development of America, on the establishment of America, upon the course of America, why you get completely lost studying our history.
And they were the ones through which this work was being put into operation in England, in Europe, and eventually in America and the world.
So that America then could be used to lead the world into the philosophic empire. You understand that America was founded by Christians as a Christian nation. However, there were always those people on the other side who wanted to use America, use our military power and our financial power to establish enlightened democracies throughout the world and restore lost Atlantis.
Yeah, maybe Bacon had it right. Maybe Atlantis is not something yet to occur, but maybe it's occurring right now in America.
In his lifetime, Sir Francis Bacon referred to himself as the herald of a new age. He promoted a new universal order for the whole world. Can this be what early American founders referred to with the words Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages? And does this vision affect America today?
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
As America marches forward, spreading democracy throughout the globe, is she merely promoting freedom or fulfilling an ancient plan? Is she following a course planned for centuries by men who believe she is chosen for a secret destiny? To understand the present and possibly the future, we look into the past as we unfold the secret mysteries of America's beginnings. Can America be the new Atlantis? The movie National Treasure revealed to many the role of Freemasons in the founding of America. Often seen as a shadowy organization with hidden agendas, Masonry was portrayed in a positive light. Was this coincidence, or could there have been something behind it?
I think there's probably a little something behind it.
The Freemasons among our founding fathers left us clues like these. The unfinished pyramid, the all-seeing eye. They're speaking to us through these.
Well, the movie National Treasure is probably the first film in many years that has given a positive spin to the Masonic Lodge. And essentially it seems to have been at least partially designed as kind of a propaganda piece for them.
They were basically trying to say that these people who have hidden this secret knowledge of whatever it was, the gold stash or whatever, the Masons, are basically good guys.
Because it makes them appear to be this sort of benign, shadowy group that's in the background protecting these important ancient secrets and also protecting this great, massive treasure.
It was fairly accurate in its Masonic elements.
You can tell whoever made the film either was a Mason, and of course there's a lot of Masons in Hollywood, or else had done a lot of research.
Screenwriter Jim Kauf, who developed the storyline for Disney Pictures, claims no Masonic connection, yet some researchers are not convinced.
Masons were involved in the writing of that, it seems to me, because then they tried to turn it around and say that that Freemasonry is a good thing, that it has these hidden secrets deep within it, and that someday will be revealed, and bring good things to America, etc.
Yet did the filmmakers accurately portray the real secrets of Masonry?
The thing I think that's unfortunate about the movie is, other than it kind of glamorizes the Masons, is that it makes it sound like the treasure of Masonry is monetary, that it's this enormous cachet of wealth and gold and jewels and urns and statues and whatever. And really that's not what the treasure of Masonry is. The treasure of Masonry is esoteric wisdom. It is what Masons believe. It is the secret of eternal life and immortality. And that's an entirely different thing.
Conspiracy theorists have suggested that the film was intended to mislead. But the question remains, if Masons were involved in the making of the film, what would motivate them to tell a story about a society sworn to secrecy?
I think Masons have been pretty desperate over the last couple decades. They've taken a lot of hits, due in at least part to my books, and their membership is declining fast. Men love secrets, and that's just a basic truism. And so if they advertise that through a popular movie, maybe it would generate a little more interest.
On one level, the film, I think it does some good in that it does educate people about the origins of our country and the fact that the origins of our country was very much steeped in Masonry. But on the other hand, I think it misleads about the benign nature of Masonry's involvement, and also it misleads by defining the nature of what Masonry has been guarding for the last 3,000 years.
But what has Masonry been guarding for the last 3,000 years? The real history of the craft, as it is called, varies from one source to another, and is a continued thorn of controversy. Masons claim biblical origins dating back to Tubal-Cain, the first craftsman, as well as Nimrod, who built the Tower of Babel and founded the ancient city of Babylon. King Solomon plays an important role, as Masons are said to have been the builders of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. No less important is the influence of Gnosticism, sometimes called the mother of Masonry. According to Masonic historian Albert Mackey, Gnosticism is where Masonry gets the mysterious letter G, as seen here in the midst of the Masonic square and compass, a symbol that often adorns Masonic tombstones. Known for rejecting the biblical Gospels, the Gnostics claimed to be the real Christians, an issue the apostles spoke vehemently against in the New Testament. The Gnostic Gospels have been promoted by writers like Elaine Pagels and celebrities such as Jane Fonda. It was the Gnostic teachings that formed the heart of Dan Brown's blockbuster book, The Da Vinci Code. The Gnostics were known to express a humanistic view of Christ, a view they are said to have exploited for the purpose of justifying their debauchery of women. Hence the tales of Jesus and his alleged relationship with Mary Magdalene, a view often attributed to the Gnostics and repeated in Brown's controversial book. but Masonry's most popular debates, especially with films like National Treasure and books such as The Da Vinci Code, Born in Blood, and Holy Blood, Holy Grail, seem to involve the mysterious Knights Templar, whose connection to Freemasonry is often seen at the Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland's capital city of Edinburgh. A place that not only reveals much about the Templars and Masonry, but within may be secrets to the founding of the New World. But whatever the connection or controversy, most Masons trace their craft back to the mysteries of ancient Egypt.
Egypt is like pretty much the proximate fountainhead of all esoteric mystery teaching.
After the example of the Egyptian craftsmen, the Masons carved their own imagery in the great structures of Europe. Secret signs and symbols were embedded into their work, the meaning of which was to be hidden from outsiders.
These were the craft masons who actually built the temples. If you look at European architecture, you know, all those big cathedrals in Europe, Cologne Cathedral in Germany, Notre Dame in Paris, Salisbury Cathedral in England, all those beautiful cathedrals were all built around the 1200s and 1300s. And it was these masons who knew their business, and they wanted to keep their skills secret.
All the great cathedrals of Europe were built by stonemasons who had an understanding of esoteric lore, and they're basically riddles in stone.
When Masons came to America, they practiced their trade in the same way they had in Europe, embedding secret codes within the design and foundation of the American colonies. Some believe this may account for the geographic location of the 5 great Revolutionary War cities. In particular, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. have all been built in perfect alignment along the eastern seaboard. Researcher Jim Allison believes this alignment may be a part of something greater.
Let me say this, I think it is very unlikely that the alignment is coincidental.
According to Allison, the alignment of cities and ancient sites are part of a series of great circles that encompass the Earth. These circles are supposedly like lines of power upon which significant sites are built.
The simplest example, the most obvious example of a great circle, though, is the equator, because it runs around the center of the Earth. It runs due east-west. Meridians of longitude, which run due north-south through the north and south poles, if you extend it all the way around, those are also great circles because they run through the center of the Earth.
Allison claims that mystical sites like the pyramids, Easter Island, the Mayan and Aztec cities are all built upon these great circles. In addition, one of these great circles contains the 5 cities that date back to the era of the American Revolutionary War.
Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York City, and Boston are in fact aligned. They're fairly close together. The distance from Washington, D.C. to Boston is 400 miles. And as a result of that, you can see the alignment just on a flat map, because the curvature of the Earth is not so much over that distance to distort it. But on a three-dimensional map, it's even clearer.
But is this just a curious coincidence, or could there be some hidden meaning behind it? In the 1920s, an Englishman named Alfred Watkins noted a series of straight tracks or lines upon the Earth's surface that seemed to connect the ancient monuments and holy sites around the world.
What he found was that in a number of cases, a number of these monuments were aligned in dead straight lines that extended from a few miles to, in some cases, many miles. He coined the term ley lines to describe and to explain these alignments. Watkins believed that there are some type of grid lines that run through the earth, of lines of energy or magnetism or electromagnetism or some other kind of attraction over the earth. And that's what he described as ley lines. Watkins believed that the builders of these sites were aware of these lines that ran through the earth and that they intentionally built these monuments on these lines.
While Watkins' findings were not openly received by all, his views have been most often embraced by members of the esoteric community.
In the occult, there's this concept of ley lines, L-E-Y, which are lines of force that some people say are like the acupuncture points of the earth. And you always want to build things on a ley line. All of the great cathedrals of Europe are built upon these ley lines, which are like currents of power.
These currents of power are thought to have magical significance. Some believe they act as portals for spirits to travel to and from the ancient monuments that fall within these alignments. But the question remains, were such power lines important to the builders of early American cities? Were they aligned with a secret purpose in mind?
It's very important where the Pyramid of Khufu is built, the Great Pyramid. And it's very important where Stonehenge is built.
There are several great circles that ancient monuments are aligned with. And in some cases, ancient and modern development is aligned with. Extending the alignment from Boston to the northeast towards Europe, the alignment crosses over the Atlantic and crosses into England and crosses over Stonehenge, which of course is one of the more significant monuments, certainly in England and arguably anywhere.
Can it be coincidental that the early colonists built these 5 cities in perfect alignment with each other and in perfect alignment with Stonehenge? Allison admits that many of the ancient monuments are aligned on ley lines or great circles within a fraction of 1 degree, a distance that sometimes equals 15 or 20 miles. But in the link between the Old World and the New, there is a 0 deviation between the 5 American cities and England's mysterious Stonehenge. According to Allison, they are perfectly aligned. Can such a perfect alignment be unintentional, or the result of some natural attraction of ley lines in the earth?
There's some dispute about that amongst people who study these ley lines as to whether the builders were aware of an attraction and they built it for that reason, or whether there was possibly an attraction that they were unaware of, but nonetheless caused them to build these sites in alignment. But the simple fact is they are aligned.
But the evidence continues. America's capital city, Washington, D.C., is said to be positioned on the 77th meridian west, considered a sacred location referred to as God's longitude. In his book, Marking Time, author Duncan Steele argues that the early expedition of Sir Walter Raleigh, known for the lost colony at Roanoke, was not quite the failure it seemed to be. Raleigh's intent, according to Steele, was not really to establish a colony, but rather to capture God's longitude by locating the 77th meridian.
The goal of the occultist who understands these concepts is to have things exist within the sacred harmonies of the earth. And if indeed they believe that the 77th meridian was somehow very sacred, then it would be incredibly important for them to plant their flag there.
In Washington, D.C. is even found Meridian Hill, said to mark the precise location of the sacred longitude. Raleigh himself was a member of Bacon's secret society in England. Was he sent on a mystical journey so that America might be designed according to esoteric principles from the beginning? and how many others came ashore as a result of the Baconian influence.
The Rosicrucians came ashore very early on in the founding of the New World. The Masons were also there from the beginning, and I think from very early on, this if you will, cartel, this occult cartel of various groups, basically had it as their goal to establish a society on this continent that was wholly given over to esoteric goals.
The Rosicrucian Order, with its modern headquarters in San Jose, California, has for centuries been linked to Freemasonry.
Well, you have to understand that Freemasonry is simply the modern-day manifestation of the ancient mystery religions. The ideas of Masonry have been around literally for thousands of years. And of course, Rosicrucianism was simply a forerunner of modern-day Masonry.
The order takes its name from its primary symbol, the rose and cross. Like Masonry, the Rosicrucians trace their religion to the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Their power base in San Jose centers around an Egyptian museum.
There are chapters of the Rosicrucians studying every place across America. And one only has to go up on the internet, and they actually have websites where they recruit people into the Rosicrucian order. People have no idea that these people are even here.
Perhaps the reason for their lack of exposure is that they are dwarfed by the chief of all secret societies, the ancient order of Freemasonry. Nevertheless, the Rosicrucians are said to be the first of the secret orders to have opened a door in the New World.
The very first that we know of occult beachhead in America was Rosicrucian. I was out on a speaking tour recently, and I had the opportunity to visit the Ephrata Cloister, it's called, in Ephrata, Pennsylvania. And it's where the original Rosicrucian community built its headquarters, right on the east coast of the United States. And that was in the 1600s. And right about the same time that Christianity was establishing its beachhead in America, so was the Rosicrucian order.
In the 16th century, Sir Francis Bacon had become the chief of the Rosicrucians in England. Researchers believe that Bacon sent members of this society to America to launch his esoteric empire, the New Atlantis. This 1910 Newfoundland stamp commemorates Bacon's early influence. It reads, "Lord Bacon, the guiding spirit in the colonization scheme."
I know that Rosicrucianism today holds Bacon in highest esteem as an active transmitter of the secrets. If you go to the AMORC, the Ancient Mystical Order of the Rose and the Cross, the Rosicrucian Order Center in San Jose, Bacon is everywhere. He's a demigod in Rosicrucianism.
But Bacon's influence was not confined to Rosicrucianism. He is considered by some to have been the first to formalize the mystery teachings into a system now recognized as modern Masonry.
So Freemasonry up to that point had been very, very much involved with just the craft of building buildings. It had been a guild in this country, and each country had their own type of Masonry or Freemasonry. There was no sense of it being a worldwide fraternity where religious belief or race did not matter. Before that, it had been very racial and very religious, but Bacon turned it into a truly international society.
This international society would also come to the New World. And while Bacon's Rosicrucians would maintain a position of careful anonymity, the Order of Masonry would stretch its hands in America to the very heights of power. Nowhere is the Masonic presence more clearly seen than in the design of America's capital city, Washington, D.C.
Yes, Washington, D.C. is completely based on Masonic architecture.
The whole architecture is laid out in an occult manner with Masonic symbology. Every major building in Washington, D.C. has a Masonic plaque on it. I mean, the Masons have permeated, and the other secret societies have permeated our society since the very beginning.
In his book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, author David Oveson confirms the esoteric influence of Masonry in the design and building of Washington, D.C. Oveson reveals the occult ceremonies surrounding the laying of the city's cornerstone, a ritual that involved the father of the nation, George Washington. 200 years later, in a ceremony commemorating this event, Senator Strom Thurmond, himself a 33rd degree Mason, is pictured alongside the cornerstone upon which is carved a Masonic square and compass.
If you either look at the map of Washington, D.C. or try and drive in Washington, D.C., you think it must have been designed by a nutcase. But actually it was designed by a Freemason, a French Freemason named L'Enfant. I think Pierre Charles L'Enfant was his name. And it's full of esoteric symbolism.
Oveson writes that, like the pyramids of Egypt, the entire city was built in alignment with the stars, and suggests that the hidden purpose for the Masonic rituals is that America might be empowered by the gods of the ancient world. Can this be the reason for the pagan god and goddess images that have come to represent America? Tradition often claims that America was founded as a Christian nation only. But if this is the case, why are its symbols those of the pagan religions rather than images of Christ, the apostles, and stories from the Bible?
Well, I think that this is where the great confusion comes in. America was founded as a Christian nation, but it was also founded as an occult nation. And there have always been two parallel forces here in America. One the Christian, one the occult, dating back into the 1600s. And until you understand that, you can't understand anything going on in the world today.
The conflict between Christianity and the occult has compelled some to reject entirely the influence of God in early America. In February of 2005, CBSNews.com posted an article titled Our Godless Constitution. In it, author Brooke Allen wrote that our nation was not founded on Christian principles, but on Enlightenment ones. God only entered the picture as a very minor player, and Jesus Christ was conspicuously absent. A chief issue of debate are the very symbols that define the United States. Where did they come from, and what or who exactly do they represent? For many, the answers lie in the secret societies.
I mean, you can see their influence on the back of the Great Seal of the United States, where in 1782 they put on a pyramid capped by an all-seeing eye with the slogan beneath, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new secular order of the world. That was in 1782. It was put on the back of the Great Seal of the United States, hidden there until about 1935, when it was taken off the back of the Great Seal of the United States and put on the back of the American dollar bill, where it is today, symbolizing the influence of the secret societies on America. And you know, there are some of our Christian ministries that want to tell you that a cult symbol is a Christian symbol. It just goes to show how effectively the Christians have been misled, and they've been misled intentionally by people who've infiltrated the Christian movement and have told them, oh, this is a Christian symbol. Well, where in Christian symbology do you come up with a pyramid? Where in Christian symbology do you come up with a glorified eye light? This is all the symbology that everybody who's involved with the occult understands.
The glorified or all-seeing eye is known as the Eye of Horus, one of the most important gods of the Egyptian mysteries. Other pagan icons include the Washington Monument, an obelisk normally dedicated to the Egyptian sun god. Meanwhile, the idea for the Statue of Liberty was taken from the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and combined with the imagery of the goddess of ancient Babylon, Queen Semiramis. But what do these esoteric elements tell us about the founding fathers of America? Who were they, and what was the light by which they saw the world and themselves in it?
The majority of the people who were in the founding fathers were either deists, or else they were free thinkers, or they were Rosicrucians, or they were Masons, or they were all of the above.
But the issue is not black and white. Researchers are careful to point out the God-fearing nature of early Americans.
If we take the founding of America as the time when the Puritans came over, if that's the time that was taken, and the landing of the Pilgrims, you remember, and that date there, if that was taken as the founding of America, there was no question. These are solid Christians, out, and they were looking for freedom. They did not want to be persecuted by either the church in England, which was the Anglican Church, so the Puritans would have been persecuted as dissenters. Nevertheless, so if we take that date, that era, when the Puritans came over, they were coming over seeking freedom, religious freedom. And so they wanted to settle the land and build their little churches and worship the Lord as he told us to do, and in the manner in which he told us to do in the scriptures. That's what they wanted to do. So without question, it was settled in the beginning as a Christian nation, an opportunity to come over freely. Unfortunately, you got other people who wanted to do the same thing, but they weren't necessarily Christians.
By far, the chief source of contention is the involvement of the Founding Fathers with secret societies, namely Freemasonry.
Certainly at the time when the Declaration of Independence was signed, many of these people were involved in Masonry, no question at all about it. But it wasn't because they were dedicated to the esoteric principles of Masonry. Many of these people were strong Christians.
In America, initially, the men that were elected, I believe 90% of them were all God-fearing men.
People, on the esoteric side want to say, oh, this was a Masonic country. And there's an element of truth in that, because certainly there were many Masons, once America was established, who were working in key positions.
I believe the truth is somewhere in between, as it usually is, the two extremes.
It's a timeless struggle. Both sides of this power struggle are in full play. The sides of the secret societies, trying to push forth the new Atlantis.
And so it doesn't surprise me that most of these men in the Continental Congress or the signings of the Declaration of Independence were Masons or whatever. That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't even bother me, because I know that underneath them is a vast horde of people that were biblical Christians.
Masonry's history with America is filled with both mystery and controversy. Because of its secrecy, and because its members are bound by terrible blood oaths, Masons are reluctant to come forward with testimony.
It's a secret society. It has always been a secret society. And to reveal anything about these secret societies ensures your death. And people who've tried to expose Masonry, even to this very day, risk their lives in doing it.
Yet from the shadows, some light appears.
When you actually go into Masonry in the first 3 degrees, why, if you promise that if you are ever reveal any of the secrets of Masonry in the first degree, why you'll have your tongue cut out, and you'll have you'll be buried in the sands of the sea up to the level of your neck at the level of low tide. And at the 2nd degree, I believe they cut out your heart, and the 3rd degree, they're going to cut out your entrails and burn them.
In the 19th century, a man named Captain William Morgan was murdered by a group of Masons who were bound by such blood oaths.
Well, Captain William Morgan was a guy up in Batavia, New York in 1826. He was the first American to publish the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, of the Blue Lodge. The things you had to say, the oaths you had to take. And Masons didn't like that very much.
Captain Morgan had violated his oath by writing a book to let people know about the terrible oaths of this terrible society.
Feeling a responsibility to the Masonic Brotherhood, 3 members of the order kidnapped Morgan to make him pay for exposing the secrets of Masonry.
Hey, get this! What is this? This is ridiculous! Stop!
He was captured by a group of Masons and taken and killed.
And later on, the perpetrators made deathbed confessions of it all, so it was all very well known.
Of these deathbed confessions, at least one has survived, given by a man named Henry L. Valance, whose insight into Morgan's final moments provides a heart-wrenching account. While Valance was never brought to justice for the crime, his final confession revealed a conscience haunted by a lifetime of guilt.
If the mark of Cain wasn't upon me, the curse of the first murderer was. The bloodstain was upon my hands and could not be washed out.
Valance revealed how a council of 8 Masons had condemned William Morgan to death.
Council. They made a decision and decided your fate. Are you ready to pay for your betrayal? Talk to me, man.
I've done what was right.
And how Morgan had pleaded for his life on behalf of his wife and children.
He commenced wringing his hands and talking of his wife and children, the recollections of whom in that awful hour terribly affected him.
Please, my children, my wife.
His wife, he had said, was young and inexperienced, and his children were but infants.
You should have thought about that before you turned us in, before you wrote the book.
May God have mercy on your children, because we will not have mercy on you.
Despite Morgan's plea for mercy, Valance and his fellow Masons were determined to carry out their grim task. They gave Morgan time alone to prepare himself to die. How Morgan passed that time, said Valance, he could not tell, for everything was quiet as a tomb within. When they returned, they bound his hands and led him away to the awful fate they had prepared for him.
The story was he was actually drowned after being mistreated horribly for a period of time. Well, when the word of this got out, and people began to realize this dangerous influence of Masonry within our society, why the membership of the organization fell off dramatically.
As one investigator put it, as one writer put it, Freemasonry, which was rampant throughout the country at that time, almost dried up overnight.
The public outrage over Morgan's death was profound, but when those who had murdered him were sought out, the people of the United States discovered that justice was not so easy to obtain. The reason was given by the Reverend Charles Finney in his book, The Character, Claims, and Practical Workings of Freemasonry, first published in 1869. Finney was a former Mason who lived through the Morgan affair. He claimed that justice in the case was impossible because nearly all the civil offices in the country were in the hands of Freemasons. According to Finney, even the newspapers of the day were completely under their control. Finney writes that it was found that they could do nothing with the courts, with the sheriffs, with the eyewitnesses, or with the jurors, and all their efforts were for a time entirely impotent.
So this turned into a big brouhaha. It was a big Masonic scandal because it was all known.
The Morgan incident became an issue of national importance, not simply because a man was murdered, but more importantly, Americans began to realize that their supposedly democratic country was being secretly controlled by the Masonic Brotherhood.
And this led even to separate political parties, anti-Masonic political parties being formed, and they were even called the Anti-Masonic Party. They ran candidates for president, and they were significant parties. They weren't just minority parties, so it was a really big deal.
The Anti-Masonic Party was the first third party in American politics and eventually became the Whig Party, which is more widely recognized. The party itself was led by former President John Quincy Adams, who wrote a collection of letters and essays against Freemasonry.
How can you have a free society when you have people who belong to these secret societies and have sworn these terrible blood oaths? You can't have a free society. And that's what John Quincy Adams was writing about.
Adams wrote, "I do conscientiously and sincerely believe that the order of Freemasonry, if not the greatest, is one of the greatest moral and political evils." As a result of the Morgan incident, a series of official investigations took place. In 1829, a New York State Senate committee published its findings on Masonry, stating that its members were found in almost every place where power is of any importance. 5 years later, in 1834, a joint committee in Massachusetts reported that Masonry was, quote, "a distinct independent government within our own government and beyond the control of the laws of the land by means of its secrecy."
Well, the influence of Masonry has always been here since those days. And, of course, within 15 or 20 years, why the membership of Masonry had reconstituted itself. It said they got down to only about 5,000 members there when Masonry was really exposed. But people soon forgot about the terrible things that had happened. And the fact that if you were a Mason, they really would kill you. Most people look upon Masonry as simply a fraternity, and these oaths have no meaning. But tragically, they do.
A monument was erected in Batavia, New York, and remains to this day, in remembrance of what happened to William Morgan. The inscription on its base reads, "To the memory of William Morgan, a native of Virginia, a captain in the War of 1812, a respectable citizen of Batavia, and a martyr to the freedom of writing, printing, and speaking the truth. He was abducted from near this spot in the year 1826 by Freemasons and murdered for revealing the secrets of their order." The monument goes on to tell the reader where they can find the historical records that document the Morgan account. Why would the citizens of Batavia have gone to this length? Crimes are committed every day, and people sometimes murdered. Why draw attention to William Morgan? Did they desire to warn future generations? Was it because the people of that time recognized, as Charles Finney asserts in his book, that America was being controlled by Masons from behind the scenes? But for what cause? For greed, power? Or is the answer most likely found in the great Atlantean plan? In order to bring forth the destiny of America and lead mankind into the vision of Plato and Sir Francis Bacon, the secret societies would have to control the new world, and in time, subdue the old. But how to bring about this utopian empire? In his writings, Sir Francis Bacon called for a universal reformation of the whole wide world. To bring about this reform, some believe the secret societies launched a world revolution.
People do not understand that our revolution was the first in a series of revolutions that began in 1776 and extended right up until the Cuban Revolution in 1959 when Fidel Castro came to power. And this is a series of revolutions to transform the world.
While most Americans did not fight the War of Independence for the cause of global revolution, it is undeniable that secret societies played an important role and that many of America's founders were Freemasons.
Many of them were Masons, but they were into Masonry because, of course, this was the only way that they could protect themselves. This was the only way they could keep from being found out. So they were plotting a revolution. They had to have a means of maintaining their secrecy.
I think Masonry was in fact used as a built-in network, a secret network in which to foment the American Revolution. They didn't have to put a network together, it was already there. All they had to do was sort of ride on the back of Freemasonry to make the American Revolution work.
And work it did with the help of Masonic ingenuity, beginning with the kickoff event, the Boston Tea Party.
And what was the Boston Tea Party? Who was behind that? Who were the raiders of the English tea ship? Admittedly, at this point, it was the Masonic Lodge in Boston. They were all Masons. It was the Masons wanting to implement this revolution.
The leader of the men who dressed up like Indians and threw the tea into Boston Harbor was the legendary Paul Revere, whose famous ride would alert Americans that the British were coming. Pictured here with a teapot commemorating his rebellion, Paul Revere was a prominent member of the Masonic Order. George Washington, known as the father of our country, along with many of his generals, were also Masons. Yet Washington's involvement with Masonry is hotly debated.
Our information is that he did not do anything with the Masonic Lodge for the last 30 years of his life.
The debate centers around a letter written by George Washington to the Reverend G.W. Schneider on September 25, 1798, just 15 months before Washington's death. In the letter, Washington says specifically, "I must correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. The fact is, I preside over none, nor have I been in one more than once or twice within the last 30 years.
And in Washington's case, I defend him by saying the Masons are very secretive. When they approach a man to be a member of their organization, they will not and cannot tell him what it's all about. But what they can do is to say, well, you see, there were all these famous people. They were Freemasons, and they can name off the kings. And today, of course, they can name off Washington. And so the candidate would then argue to himself, well, who am I? I'm just a little guy, you know, or I might be a senator, but nevertheless, who am I compared with these? If it was good enough for them, surely it's good enough for me. If it's secret, it's going to be a good thing. So they get in, and they're not told the whole story. They're not told in the first, second, or even third degree. They're not told the whole story, but little by little, as they acquire more knowledge and as they are deemed to be faithful to the cause, they are told more. And that's just how they get the people in.
It is only fair to mention that many Masons continue to insist that Washington was very active in the craft. Yet there is no debate about the Masonic membership of Benjamin Franklin, who is deeply involved not only with Masonry, but a whole variety of secret societies in America, in England, and in France. Societies that had everything to do with his success during the American Revolutionary War.
Benjamin Franklin is a very paradoxical, complex fellow, as might be expected for someone who was such a great genius. But at times he seems like he's a Christian. At times he seems like he's a scoundrel. At times it seems like he's a Luciferian, and at times it seems like he's a Rosicrucian.
He was a strange character, Benjamin Franklin, a sort of a shuttle diplomat between Philadelphia and Paris and London, England.
He was, of course, an ambassador in Europe, and when he was over in Europe, he became a member of a group called the Hellfire Club, which was a kind of pseudo-satanic organization in 1700s. It was founded by an English nobleman named Francis Dashwood, and it basically existed as a place where men could gather and have orgies and worship the devil and basically get loaded and do whatever they wanted, under the guise of it being a satanic society.
The Hellfire Club was a part of the so-called gentlemen's clubs of 17th and 18th century England. While the debauched behavior of these groups was initially tolerated, once they began to dabble in satanic rituals, they were forced to go underground, literally.
Hellfire Club, as a matter of fact, I used to live quite near that place. It's on the west side of London at a place called West Wickham. It's a hill. It's a chalk hill, now of course covered in grass, and on the top of that chalk hill is a church. On the top of the church there's a golden ball. There's a cross on top of that. Now that's a Christian church, but inside the hill is a cave. Often those chalk hills, they do have caves inside them. It's the way they're formed. And in the cave there, they would gather together. Now, I don't say that it was the church, the occupants of the church that gathered there, but whether they knew it or not, the Hellfire Club would hold their meetings once a month underneath the church. And Benjamin Franklin would go and visit that at the times when he came to visit England, yeah.
He was very much apparently into some of the ideas of the esoteric movement of his day.
A book on witchcraft, magic, and the supernatural claims that Benjamin Franklin often came to Sir Francis Dashwood for information on the occult. Dashwood himself was said to be a Rosicrucian and leading member of the secret orders. In this portrait, we see a young Francis Dashwood with his hand posed in a fist-like position. In Masonry, this hand signal is known as the lion's paw, and is used in Masonic ritual. Among Satanists, however, this same gesture is said to be called the devil's claw. While it cannot be said how deeply involved Franklin was with the occult, the Hellfire focus on drinking and debauching women would certainly have agreed with his character.
He was very famous for being a ladies' man. He was very much a playboy, which of course would be contrary to being a devout Christian.
The Hellfire Club had great disdain for Christianity. In fact, they did not call themselves Hellfire, but rather the monks of Medmenham Abbey. Such parody was the influence of a French priest named François Rabelais, condemned as a heretic for writing a series of perverse comedies called Gargantua and Pantagruel. In them, Rabelais mocked religion, glorified immorality, and defended man's right to pursue without restraint the desires of his own will. Adopting his philosophy, the Hellfire motto was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Could this have been what attracted Franklin to the group? An opportunity to escape the puritanical tendencies of America, while in England to pursue lusty desires that would have been openly condemned by his fellow countrymen, at least at that time. But more than a century later, the Hellfire motto would be adopted by British occultist Aleister Crowley, who was often called the wickedest man in the world. Like Francis Dashwood and the Hellfire members, Crowley took part in satanic rituals, most famously at his Abbey Thelema in Sicily, a name taken from François Rabelais' anti-Christian parodies. Crowley's hatred for Christianity was so intense he often referred to himself as the Beast of the Apocalypse from the Book of Revelation. He was a Freemason and a Rosicrucian who made Do What Thou Wilt famous through the 20th century, with followers like L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, Harvard professor and drug guru Timothy Leary, and even Beatles founder John Lennon. Crowley is often credited with sparking the 1960s cultural revolution, the do-your-own-thing mentality dedicated to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What could be called the modern legacy of men like Franklin, Dashwood, and the Hellfire Club. But wait a minute. Obviously, it cannot be said that Franklin's involvement with the Hellfire Club is to be fully equated with the often crazed activities of a man like Crowley or even Timothy Leary. Still, one must wonder what Franklin was doing with a group of immoral aristocrats who dabbled in devil worship, even if they were just kidding around, as some have suggested. Is it likely that this legendary founder of America, the man who discovered electricity, invented the bifocals, and co-authored the Declaration of Independence, simply spent his time in England getting drunk and seducing women? Franklin was known to be a crafty fellow. Could his dealings with Dashwood and the Hellfire Club have somehow been a part of a greater agenda? After all, Sir Francis Dashwood was no ordinary drunken rake. He also happened to be a member of the British Parliament and was a close friend and advisor to King George III, the man the American colonists would rebel against. The Hellfire Club itself were made up of English nobility, some of whom held high offices in the king's government. Was it mere coincidence that these men, close friends of Franklin, just happened to be in power when the British were defeated? In his book, The Occult Conspiracy, author Michael Howard chronicles how Benjamin Franklin came to England in 1758 to discuss the future of the American colonies with Sir Francis Dashwood. Meanwhile, British historian Richard Deacon, in his History of the British Secret Service, claims that Dashwood's Hellfire Club functioned as a center of English espionage. Because of Franklin's many clandestine activities, some involving a British double agent named Edward Bancroft, Deacon and fellow historian Professor Cecil B. Curry speculate that Ben Franklin may have been a covert spy for the British government, known either as Number 72 or with the code name Moses. But was Franklin working for the British? Or were secret powers within the king's own government working with Franklin for the ancient plan of all secret societies, the New Atlantis? Why would British intelligence refer to Benjamin Franklin as Moses? Normally, enemies are given names like Carlos the Jackal or the Butcher of Baghdad. But Moses? Was the name itself a kind of cipher or secret code? Had they already determined that as Moses led the children of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, so Franklin would lead the American colonies to freedom from King George? Could this be why Benjamin Franklin's initial design for the Great Seal of the United States was that of Moses, standing on the shoreline of the Red Sea as the waters destroyed Pharaoh and his army, with the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God"? Coincidence? Maybe. Yet in his book, America's Secret Destiny, author Robert Hieronymus, whose doctrinal thesis on the reverse of the Great Seal has been used by the White House, the State Department, and the Department of the Interior, makes the comment that Franklin's design for the seal represented, quote, how he viewed America's birth and destiny. Did Franklin really see himself as Moses, defeating King George, the colonial pharaoh, with the help of Dashwood and the Hellfire Club? An alarming theory. But for British intelligence to undermine King George on behalf of a secret agenda should not be terribly surprising, at least not to the modern American. Consider the conflict between President John F. Kennedy and the CIA during the Bay of Pigs invasion. The CIA reportedly lied to the president on behalf of their secret agenda involving an assassination attempt on Fidel Castro, something that would later lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. JFK was so surprised at their power, believing it to be a threat to the American people, he vowed to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Or what about the Iran-Contra affair, where President Ronald Reagan stated emphatically that the U.S. was not providing arms to Iran in exchange for hostages being held by pro-Iranian terror groups?
In spite of the wildly speculative and false stories about arms for hostages and alleged ransom payments, we did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages.
But Reagan soon returned with an apology once he learned that, yes, the U.S. was illegally selling arms to Iran, an enemy country. The profits from the sales were then being used to finance a secret CIA operation involving the Contras in Nicaragua. As with JFK, Reagan claimed that he had been manipulated and lied to by secret powers within the intelligence community.
It's going on that had been kept from me in various covert
Mr.
operations.
President, did they deceive you? You didn't answer whether Poindexter and North deceived you.
Presidents Reagan and Kennedy were humiliated at being the most powerful men in the world who were unaware of what the hidden powers in their own government were up to. Well, at least in the case of Kennedy. It was later revealed that President Reagan knew more about the covert actions of the intelligence community than he had let on. After all, his vice president, George Bush Sr., was the former head of the CIA and a member of an elite secret society known as the Skull and Bones. Some find it interesting that while in office, President Reagan was made an honorary 33rd degree Mason. Since then, America's presidents have all been members of secret orders, including Skull and Bonesman George W. Bush, whose war on terror is said by some to have sparked the beginnings of World War III. Bush claimed it was the CIA who provided the information about weapons of mass destruction that ultimately led to the war in Iraq. As of the making of this documentary, that information has turned out to be false. An intelligence error? Maybe. Or perhaps the same powers that were working in the days of Benjamin Franklin have never really ceased to function. Is it just a coincidence that the war on terror has provided the opportunity to spread democracy to all the world?
And this is what people don't understand, as our president talks about how we want to bring democracy to all these countries of the world. Well, why doesn't he want to bring a republic to these countries? We were a republic. We were never a democracy. It is only the people from the mystery religions and the secret societies who are pushing this idea of world democracy, or this combination of enlightened nations, enlightened democracies to rule the world. As incredible as it may seem, there are really people who believe that. They're working full-time to accomplish that goal. And until you understand that they're the primary force behind the wars of this last century and World War III, which we are entering into today, unless they understand that the whole idea is to create this reestablishment of what they believe is lost Atlantis, this wonderful utopian society that they believe existed eons ago. Anybody who studied the history of America knows we were not established as a democracy. Our founding fathers didn't believe in democracy. They wanted a republic, a government of law, not the democracy, which is what the secret societies have been working for well over 3,000 years.
Could this be the secret behind what's happening in the world today? And was this the underlying motive in the war for American independence? To wrestle the new world from the power of the old, that it might in time be used to bring forth the great Atlantean plan, envisioned by Sir Francis Bacon.
Benjamin Franklin certainly knew the works of Francis Bacon and all the ethics and things that he was trying to establish.
Bacon was a man that Benjamin Franklin had much in common with. Both men were the leading scientists of their time. Both men were involved in printing, and both men published works that helped to transform the people of their generation. Both men developed their own system of ciphers and secret codes, which they used for intelligence purposes during wartime. And both men were deeply involved in the Masonic and Rosicrucian movements of their day. Franklin was a member of Masonic and secret orders in America, in England, and in France, the three countries involved in the American Revolution. But some researchers argue that his influence in France truly demonstrates his loyalty to a plan that looked beyond America, to a global revolution.
He was the master of the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, Neuchoir, the Lodge of the Nine Sisters right in Paris, and that's where the revolution started, incidentally. So he was lodge master there every time he visited the place.
He, as so many young people, very intelligent people, really believed that man could create a better society without being totally reliant upon God. And of course, we know that eventually he went to France, and when he was in France as the American ambassador to France, he was instrumental in pushing these ideas that led to the French Revolution.
Franklin went to France to convince King Louis XVI to finance the American Revolution. But in the process, Franklin was preaching radical ideas that would later on inspire the French to overthrow Louis, the very monarch who had helped to pay for the founding of America. Americans desperately needed money to fight the War of Independence because, according to Franklin, England had ruined their economy to keep America from becoming too prosperous.
When he was ambassador to England, the Bank of England said, how come America, the representatives of the Bank of England said, how come America is getting so rich? And Franklin, in his autobiography, recounts the story. He said, well, that's easy. In America, we create our own money and we owe no interest to pay to no one. So the Bank of England said, oh, that's very interesting. So they immediately had passed through Parliament the Currency Act of 1764. And what did the Currency Act do? It outlawed the creation of America's own money and put America on the gold standard, made Americans pay their taxes in gold or silver coin, which of course was very scarce in the American colonies in those days. So what was the result? It immediately plunged America into a deep depression. Franklin says that this depression, and everyone in America was well aware of what the depression, who caused the depression, why it was caused, just because England outlawed America just simply printing its own money, and that it was this Currency Act of 1764 that was really the root cause of the American Revolution, because it caused so much unemployment and a terrible economic upheaval. And Franklin's quote is, we could have endured a little tax on tea and other matters, but it was England's taking away our ability to create our own currency that was really the root cause of the revolution.
And so King Louis supported the American cause through financial aid and the use of troops. But some years later, many of the French soldiers who fought for America would return to France to fight the French Revolution. Among their leaders would be an American hero, the Marquis de Lafayette, who served alongside George Washington. Lafayette was also a Freemason and close acquaintance of Benjamin Franklin, the man who seemed to be the friend of nearly all the revolutionaries of the day.
It was Benjamin Franklin who initiated Voltaire himself in 1778. He could then brag and say, "Oh, Voltaire was a Mason." Ooh. People would say, if it's good enough for him, it must be good enough for me. I don't know what it's all about, but it sounds like a good thing.
While the writings of Voltaire inspired the French revolutionaries, Americans were compelled by another of Franklin's close friends, Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine was a member of the Lunar Society. Benjamin Franklin would go and meet with them, yeah. Anyway, he recognized in Thomas Paine that the fellow was, he was pretty good at writing. And so he brought him back with him to Philadelphia. And he wrote the pamphlets that started the revolution in America. It was a little booklet called Common Sense. Thomas Paine wrote that, and it was kind of inciting people to war against King George III.
With the help of Paine and his fellow Masons, Franklin worked to create the revolutionary mentality among the colonies.
Yes, Franklin developed the concept of the virtuous revolution. The thought of revolting against a monarch amongst European people was absolutely anathema. It went totally against the European mindset of the divine right of kings, where government is of God, kings are appointed by God, and so the virtuous revolution was something really different.
But not all Masons went along with Franklin's ideas. like the man known as the Great American Trader, Benedict Arnold, also a Mason who chose to side with the British during the war. Nevertheless, for good or for ill, Masonry was clearly at the helm of the War of Independence. It seems ironic, however, that American Masonry today owes its allegiance to the very country it rebelled against. Modern Masons trace their official beginning to the United Grand Lodge of England, founded in 1717.
The official start of modern Masonry is in 1717 in the Apple Tree Tavern in London, where the first Grand Lodge of England was convened. And that's called the Mother Lodge, because essentially all English-speaking lodges precipitate out of that. And for example, all American lodges, all the different Grand Lodges of the different states, all ultimately owe their allegiance and their warrant to the Grand Lodge of England.
Yet prior to the formation of the Grand Lodge, the seeds of modern Masonry had already been sown through the work of Francis Bacon.
Francis Bacon established the Masonic organization, that whole body that was established by Francis Bacon. The ethical programs that were inherent within that, he was responsible for all those. His philosophy, his ethics, his literature that he was responsible for would certainly be known to Benjamin Franklin.
Was Franklin following Bacon's plan? Was it mere coincidence that he was a chief catalyst in the launching of the American Revolution? Or that his influence would also bring about the revolution in France? Masonic philosopher Manly P. Hall wrote that not only were many American founders Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe, which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose, known only to the initiated few. Hall further suggests that Benjamin Franklin was among those few. In his book, The Secret Destiny of America, Hall writes of Franklin's involvement with the plan of Francis Bacon. In Chapter 13, titled Bacon's Secret Society Set Up in America, Hall features an illustration showing the eastern seaboard with Benjamin Franklin overseeing it, while beside him is the shadow of Bacon. Hall claims that Franklin spoke for the secret societies and that most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members. He says, quote, "The plan was working out. The new Atlantis was coming into being in accordance with the program laid down by Francis Bacon." To those who have studied him, Sir Francis Bacon is one of the most enigmatic figures in world history. Baconian societies have existed for centuries since his death in 1626. All of them credit Bacon with the great advancements of the New World.
Bacon is such an interesting character, such a complex character. He was right at the center of the storm politically. He even claimed in one of his writings that he was in possession of all knowledge. You can't say that he was ignorant of the Christian concept. He obviously had some concept of Christianity and speaks of the Lord Jesus Christ, and yet he's a proponent of the New Atlantis concept. Just a very complicated character.
Bacon is known as the father of modern science and the grandfather of the English Enlightenment.